It's a pleasure to follow the Honourable Member Filton Bradley Stoke, who I've seemed to have been following quite recently, just this weekend at Yalta European Strategies and before leaving for Ukraine in Leeds, and I'll come back to that. But also at Yalta European Strategies, we had the Minister, the Shadow European Minister, and my co-chair of the Ukraine APG, the member of the Isle of Wight, as well as the Honourable Member for Gresham, who's not here. We had a real, strong UK contingent. But my journey into Ukraine this time starts a bit earlier, actually, with the Honourable Member Filton Bradley Stoke at the Leeds Ukrainian Community Centre for the Ukraine's National Day.
My honourable friend
I will give way.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. And would he join with me in supporting and thanking the groups like he was about to mention, I'm sure, people like in Newport West who have joined together to fund medicines, equipment, money and all sorts of other vital things to go to the Ukraine to support the war effort and the people of the Ukraine.
Absolutely, it's absolutely incredible to see groups up and down the country doing that. At the event that I was at in Leeds, at the Ukrainian Centre, they showed me a picture of a vehicle they'd bought, a support vehicle that they were taking to Ukraine, which had been purchased because of an auction which in Morley and Atwood, which I attended with the Honourable Member for Morley and Atwood, where I bought a Vishishenka, which I wore in Ukraine, and raised enough money to buy that vehicle. And we're seeing that right across the country. Exactly 2 weeks ago today, I set out to Ukraine from Dover with the Ukraine Freedom Company, Emergency Ukraine and Maximum Ukraine Aid, taking 5 vehicles of aid, the second time the AKPG has done that this year, not just talking about the support we're going to give, but actually delivering in a practical way to the people of Ukraine. We left to go through Eurotunnel, and I just want to say we had to cross 4 different sets of customs borders, and at each stage there were minor delays. It was quite a long delay in one of them, which I'll come back to, and the UK government needs to do more to ensure these small, local, voluntary organisations can get through those customs borders very clearly, because they are volunteers and they will not wait 3, 4, 5 hours at each border. And the UK government needs to speak to its partners to ensure that that happens. We left and we drove through France, Belgium, Germany, Hungary, Romania, and arrived at the Danube, where we crossed into Ukraine. The very next day after we crossed the Danube, Shahed drones attacked the very same port where we crossed. And it just reflects, and I know that people have mentioned this, the real importance of the fertile Black Sea plains, which produce most of the world's sunflowers, much of its grain, and also the world's best watermelons in Kherson. And the reason that these ports are being attacked is because the Black Sea grain corridor is now closed, and we drove through the night from the Danube to Odessa. I'd never seen so many heavy goods vehicles in all my life. It made the route down to Dover look like a small car park. But they were there because they cannot take that grain by sea from Ukraine. They have to drive it to Romania or other Black Sea ports and then transport it on. And it's a purposeful attack by the Russians to try and close the port so that not just us in Europe, but those in the Gulf, those in the Horn of Africa, and right across the global south do not receive those absolutely vital foodstuffs. It's an act of ecocide. We arrived in Odessa and we met with the mayor of Odessa, Gennady Tukhanov, and he again highlighted some of the issues in Odessa with strikes on vital infrastructure. We've even visited the headquarters local mobile telephone company, where they showed us how the telecommunications had been stripped out by the Russians. And again, the UK can do more to support Ukraine in terms of their telecommunications infrastructure, because without that, then they cannot either progress the war or support the nation. From there, we travelled to Mykolaiv and we met with the Deputy Mayor for Infrastructure, and we saw the devastation and the need for reconstruction, and then to a town, and this was one of the most horrifying things I've ever seen in my life, called Posad Pokrovska in Kherson region. Not a single building was undamaged. Nearly every single building had been destroyed. What had been supplied by international efforts for those people were effectively plastic boxes. We went into one, it must have been 50 degrees in there. Horribly hot in the summer, and they'll be freezing cold in the winter. We must do more to support civilian infrastructure, particularly housing, in areas which had been occupied by Russia and destroyed by Russia and now liberated. And those brave people are living in their homes, in their home towns, without decent housing. And much more needs to be done. And some of our aid partners went with are now committed trying to bring housing solutions to those, and I hope the UK government can work with them. After we went to visit a renewable energy project, a wind farm, and there's slight irony here, we went to visit a wind farm, half of which had been completed after the invasion by Russia. I mean, just yesterday we had, or last week, sorry, my time's going slightly because it was in Ukraine, we had a UK wind farm auction where nobody took up any of the wind farms, but in Ukraine they can somehow build them in the middle of a war. But it's part of their security strategy. It's not just about climate and transition, because it's easy to take out a single power station, but it's very much hard to take out a distributed network of either wind or solar installations. And again, these are things that the UK and other partners need to be supporting more, investing in this, because this is not just about peace and rebuild, this is about the war effort now. We then went on to Kharkiv. Leeds in the process of twinning with Kharkiv. I'm really proud of our efforts, and we are going to put our full support behind raising money and delivering for the people of Kharkiv. And I met with the mayor there, Ihor Terekhov, and the north of the city had been assaulted, and we visited a school, and the school is the same distance from the centre of Kharkiv as my children's school is from the centre of Leeds, and the school had been completely destroyed and gutted. Those children do not have adequate school facilities to go to. Went to multiple blocks of flats and saw them destroyed. And in all of those locations, actually in Posad as well, we were told, you cannot walk over there, you cannot walk over there, because those areas are heavily mined. So people are living and children are playing in areas next to areas that are mined. It just shows the effort, and they're saying that at the rate they are now and the rates that we've done in previous conflicts, it will take 40 or more years to demine Ukraine. That is just not acceptable. In liberated areas, we need to step up that demining effort and be supporting that demining effort, because without demining there'll be no reconstruction. We also met some troops from the front line. Kharkiv isn't actually that far from the front line, and there's a lot of talk about Russian troops not being as good. I have to say, the chair of the Defence Select Committee, mentioned Mr. Wagner, the most elite troops now no longer on the front line. We asked them what they thought of the Russian troops still fighting, and they described them as worthy adversaries. They're taking nothing for granted. They're on the battlefield risking their lives, and we shouldn't think there's an easy victory here. Every inch of ground is hard fought and hard won by them. After Kharkiv, went to Kyiv, and said, as was said by the Honourable Member Filton Brown, so it went to the Yalta European Strategy event. And I'm not going to go into great detail about all of the speeches and all of the meetings that were had, but there were a number of real takeaways. So we've been hearing, more or less from the start of the conflict, the need to close the skies so they can progress. They're still talking about closing the skies. We're only now in the early days of training pilots. Why were we not training pilots much nearer the start? Why are we not much further on? I know in the UK, we don't have F-16s, but the point stands. And in terms of Storm Shadow missiles, they were very grateful for Storm Shadow missiles from the UK. But the Storm Shadow missiles that they have are the export variants. And for them, I'm not going to go into detail, but for them to be able to prosecute, they need the Storm Shadows that we use internally, because their range is greater within the territory of Ukraine. And so the minister, although he's gone, needs to sort of redouble his efforts and look again at our stockpile of weapons and what will help Ukraine progress this war more quickly. There is a view beginning to set in Kyiv, and I'm just warning ministers, that what's happening now, and the UK is not at the front of this, other countries are, is that whatever's asked for does arrive, but it takes too long, it is too slow, and it's too bureaucratic. And that the supply is to keep the war going and to ensure Ukraine doesn't lose, but not to ensure the speediest victory. And that's a real deep concern of people in Kyiv, in Ukraine, progressing this war. And I think that we need to do anything to ensure a rapid victory, because they're not just fighting for themselves, they are fighting for democracy and actually for our way of life and our civilization. And one of the most interesting speeches at the conference was by Timothy Schneider, professor at Yale. And he said that in the 4th century BC, the reason that the Greeks at Athens could have a democratic republic was because they were supplied with grain by the Scythians in the Black Sea, in southern Ukraine and Crimea. And that is the history of that region. Without them, we all fail. And that's why we need to step up our efforts on every front to ensure that this war is completed and there isn't a single Russian soldier on Ukrainian territory. Thank you.
Yeah.